This next session is really, really important. We cannot effectively do this work without centering the voices of people who have been and continue to be impacted by the failures of our systems to show up for people in supportive ways. This panel is going to be moderated by Stephanie Klipp, who is the clinical nurse manager of addiction medicine services at Allegheny Health Network. We're going to hear from 3 community members with lived experience of the criminal legal system. And I want to say these experiences may not be what every single person has experienced in the criminal justice system. Everybody's experiences are different. But I think it's really important to remember that there are many stories that are alarming and about the harms that people have faced because of their direct involvement with the criminal legal system or because of their criminal record afterward. And I think it's really important to shine a spotlight on that. So thank you to Shannen Lyons, Taili Thompson, and John Reznickcheck for sharing your stories with us.
Welcome, everybody. Happy to have you guys here today. It's an honor and a privilege. My name is Stephanie Klipp. I am a certified addictions nurse and also someone in long-term recovery myself, also someone who's been in the justice system. I have the privilege today to moderate a panel who have been in the justice system myself and living and their lived experience and the details they would like to share with us today. How we're going to operate is I'm going to go through a list of questions and give them the chance to answer to each one, and then we'll move to the additional question in a sequential order. And we'll begin to start with Shannen.
Obviously, my name is Shannen Lyons. I am in recovery from substance use disorder. My primary substance of choice was opiates. I work as an addiction specialist now and am a licensed clinical social worker as well as a certified drug and alcohol addictions counselor. I got into recovery in January 4th, 2016, and was involved in the criminal justice system prior to that. Most of my involvement with the criminal justice system was in Westmoreland County. So that's where my experience comes from. And what I do now is kind of work to develop programs for people who are still suffering with, active substance use disorders and make, their lives better.
And my name is Taili Thompson, and I'll kind of go from present and kind of run it backwards really quickly. I'm currently the director of operations here. I'm the director of violence prevention initiative here at Operation Better Block under the leadership of Jerome Jackson. Prior to being in this position a little over a year ago, I opened up the health department's Office of Violence Prevention under what's known as a public health approach. So I've done that for 3 years as a contractor. Prior to that, I was executive director of my own nonprofit, Youth Opportunities Development. Prior to that, I worked for 8 years under Richard Garland's One Vision, One Life under the Violence Prevention Initiative. After, during the 8 years of One Vision, One Life. And before that, I was actually a returning citizen who done 3 years in a penitentiary in New Jersey. Drug trafficking. I was caught with drug trafficking across George Washington Bridge. I was on a run from New Jersey for 3 years. I was on probation here in Allegheny County for 3 years. I kind of cycled kind of in and out of the system here at Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. And I think that's it for now. And within that time, there's a process of addiction that takes place, even though you don't consider yourself to be addicted, when on what's so-called maybe the dealer side of it, but there's an addiction that you actually have, with the daily drugs that you'll use, even within that process. So gives me ability to have some lived experience that I think is important, and I don't mind sharing. My life is considered an open book.
Hello, my name is John Reznickcheck. I am 47 years old, and I have approximately 22 and a half years of total incarceration in and out of the system.
So everyone, just to start off in a real general format, please, if you could just tell me, Shannen, what difficulties did you experience now because of your criminal record or the stigma that you feel from that criminal record has impacted you?
Thanks, Stephanie. So one of the biggest things that I think has affected me due to having a criminal background still is where I'm unable to work due to having that criminal background. I am a licensed clinical social worker. So with that, if I were to apply to many jobs and working with like children and youth, that would, as well as working for any type of like government job. That has been one of the biggest issues. Also, just, even the job that I'm at right now, they do a background check. So, I knew it was going to come up. So just the stress of, am I going to get this job still after they see the background, or are they going to rescind the offer? So I think that is one of the biggest things. And, when I was applying for my license for social work, originally they do a background check. And due to that, they had, inquired as to why I had this criminal background. And I responded honestly and told them, I was a person in long-term recovery. And at this point, I think I had 3.5 years. Well, so what happened was they put me in this, monitoring program that's made for people that are, working under their license, and they may, actively engage in using substances, or they get in trouble at work. And so they put them in this monitoring program. But due to my criminal background and my honesty about having a substance use problem in the past, even with a evaluation from a drug and alcohol treatment provider, which was Greenbrier, that said, we feel that she's fit to work as a social worker. There's no active substance use at this time. They still put me in that program for a year just because of the background check. I think that has been the biggest stigmatizing thing that has happened due to the criminal background. And, that money, that program is expensive, it's time consuming. And, if I was unable to pay for the urine screens and, leave work to go get a screening done, or if I just didn't have the means that I did at the time and the support that I did, I wouldn't have been able to do that program, and I wouldn't have been able to get my license. So I feel that some people that may happen to, but so that's the biggest thing for me.
What difficulties did you experience now because of your criminal record and or the stigma that you experienced from it?
Today, I struggle with the same thing as employment. I have credit issues because apparently I was paying off on somebody else's fines and court costs that most places will overlook having a felony if your credit score is good enough, right? And you've been working, you showing income, your credit score is above 700, so yeah, we might give you this place. And it's funny because it's like a prison without being in a prison. It's a prison without being the bars and the walls, and that's what my life feels like. And every day I have to get up, man. And I have this thing where I'll take that moment and remember where I'm at, because it's many a nights I done woke up and thought I was still in jail, and my heart is beating, and I have to decompress from that, before I start my day. I can't walk out of the door with that mentality. I can't be social. I can't even do this interview if I have that mind frame that was instilled in me, and it's a constant fight. But as far as jobs go, this is sad. I've walked into so many places that have the help wanted, apply within, text whoever for a job. Once they find out I got a felony, they're not hiring. They're not hiring, or you never hear that call back. Or if you do, like I said before, it's an economic thing. They'll look at you like, well, we can give this guy $9 an hour when the job is actually paying $12. So it still affects me to this day. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's really impactful. Taili, the same question to you.
Well, as far as the criminal record, it's always the biggest barrier to me is always the employment situation. even when I was early in my let's say being released from the criminal justice system, it always to me gave people the ability to exploit that part of me. So if there was jobs available, it would always be the temp agencies. And regardless of how well you were doing at the particular job, you always stayed in that temp agency space, which gave people the ability to profit off of you working, but yet having this criminal background. And then we'd always have to have that conversation is I don't know, I'm not sure if they can hire you or not because of your criminal background, but yet you would always have the ability that you could do the work under this temp agency position. So in my early stages of transitioning with reentry, it was always that let's say that feeling of where you can't gain stability. I mean, and that's so it's been over 19 years since I've been in the criminal justice system. But even let's say 3 years ago, when I went to go do some work for some of the government institutions, they were able to bring me in, under grant opportunities to do this work because of my experience and my qualifications that you felt would overcome your past. And even within that process, before the actual when it was time that the grants may run out, I was still hit with the language that we're not sure if they can hire you because of your criminal background, even though you were doing the work for the last 3 years. And then I felt like over the years, I had transitioned so far from who I was at that time. So from 19 years ago to present time, let's say 3 years ago, I received an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, and I received all these credentials that I felt like, wow. And I've showed the history that I haven't been incarcerated in 19 years. So why am I still having this conversation 19 years later with government institutions that saying, yes, we're hiring you to do this job, but we'll do it under a grant situation. But when it's time to actually for you to be hired to work in this government institution like everybody else, and to me it kind of exposes the foolishness of some of these systems at the same time. Because if you can do the job on one end, then what prevents you from being hired to do the job, in a formal capacity as well? So it just becomes to sum that up. It gave people the ability to exploit me because of mistakes of my criminal background over 19 years ago.
Thank you, Taili. Wow. So next, if you could tell me a little bit, why do you possibly think that the traditional system might not have worked, the justice system in the traditional sense, in the sense of punishment for you?
Well, I think the traditional sense is because it didn't fit the model of what traditional incarceration meant. 83% of that jail, that I'm talking about Lebanon Correctional Institution in Lebanon, Ohio, or Warren, Ohio, I'm sorry. 83% of that jail at the time I was incarcerated there for 5 years, 83% of that prison was never going home. You're talking guys that got football numbers, 300 to 400 years. And I'm in here with this, sentence that I got a hope shot at going home. So everything that your lawyer says and the system says is, don't get in any trouble, don't get in any fights, and you'll get paroled. You'll get out of here. Don't mess up your appeal. So like you have to balance that knife's edge where you're dealing with people. I mean, he's sleeping right up here. They're sleeping right up here, and you don't know. So in the traditional sense, that it's just a therapist at Mercy Behavioral said that what I've experienced is exactly what someone who served a tour in combat would experience. But instead of getting a leave to come home every 6 months or to have that decompression time, you don't get any of that. It's 24/7, 7 days. It's years on end of being in that stress. And it did take a toll on me. So yeah, it failed me in that way, where I wasn't rehabilitated. I was more trained. I was trained in culture. The culture there was to hate authority, to hate the judge, to hate the prosecutor.
Thank you. Those are some really invaluable experiences, truly. Okay, Shannen, back to you.
So when I, got involved with the criminal justice system, I mean, obviously for everybody, that's stress and anxiety added to an active substance use disorder. So just that in itself was, a lot to deal with. And then, the criminal justice system, for the most part, does not promote recovery. It promotes negativity and stigma, more punishment. It's kind of a hopeless, feeling that, you're going to be involved in the criminal justice system forever. People aren't, supportive of recovery. They kind of have this mentality like, you'll be back, when you get released from jail, or, nobody ever makes it. And it's just very, kind of all, for the most part, negative. And then, once I got clean, I didn't mention this, when I introduced myself, but I worked prior to working for, I work for Gateway Health Plan now. Prior to there, I worked for an outpatient drug and alcohol facility in Greensburg who contracted with Westmoreland County Prison to do outpatient drug and alcohol services and for inmates to receive the Vivitrol shot prior to being released from jail. So I went in and did group and individual therapy. So I kind of got this whole other side of look from like being an inmate to being, on the treatment end, or, like a staff person going in there. And so I had a lot of meetings and a lot of talks with, people that worked in the jail, and kind of there's just this overall, and not from everyone, because there are outliers, there are people that, are supportive of recovery, and they, they do believe that people can recover, but overall it's kind of, as I said, kind of a hopeless feeling, like, oh, here she is again. And there's just not a whole lot of like positivity.
And Taili, in the same breath, if you could speak to why do you think the traditional system didn't work?
Well, several let's say aspects is that, first of all, is that the criminal justice system, to me, when I came across it, didn't take my history into consideration, that, I was someone that made a mistake. I had just left a college campus, never got in trouble as a juvenile. It was my first offense. And everybody in the system that knew the system and know the language when it kept saying, you'll be okay. You don't have a juvenile record. You'll receive a first-time offenders program, and they took none of that into consideration. So for my first offense, I ended up receiving technically 5 years for the in New Jersey. And really, the drug that I was caught with, I was caught with heroin, and technically it could have been considered simple possession of the drug that I was caught with. But when you attach the intent to deliver, that's what creates the felony. So my thing is that they would look at my past and be like, graduating from high school, I was vice president of the school for 2 years. I received Martha King Achievement Award my senior year. I said that they'll actually do this background on who I am, and I'll be okay. I'll, fall under one of these programs that they say I should fall under. But the system traditionally just has this thing that he's a dealer and we punish dealers. And literally, once I was arrested and I made bail, I became worse. Like, so now I have lawyers that I got to pay for. I got money that needs. So I got more entrenched in actually what I was doing. And actually during that time is what brought about my addiction, because now, I'm cutting heroin at a faster pace, and I'm really getting addicted to the tables. If you know about, cutting the heroin, I was consuming those fumes, and I was becoming more and more addicted to a process that I felt I had to double down on. because now I have this over my head where I have to go back to Jersey, answer to the charges, and a lawyer charged me $5,000 in that process of money that I didn't have in the beginning because I was doing it because I felt like I needed money. So you kind of just double down on the whole system, that the whole monster within itself, and I'm becoming more addicted. Even though I'm addicted to the tables, but I'm using marijuana at an alarming rate, and then it just became worse. And like I said, I got to the point that after I'd done a suppression hearing for the drugs and paid the lawyer, and none of that worked, I just didn't go back, literally. So now I'm on the run for 3 years, and then when they catch it to me, I got to give them the 3 years. So all of that just kind of spiraled, and it just spirals out of control. And at no point did anyone ever really look at me as being addicted. It was always on the side of, we're going to punish him. We're going to keep punishing him. We're going to punish him, even though we got something that's set up that says if it's your first offense, that you shouldn't be as punished, as cruel, as harsh as everyone else.
And Taili, can you segue just for a second? I was going to possibly ask if you could speak to, in the same breath, what your experience is along that line with the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. I know that could be a lot, but you kind of spoke to some of those things. So if you could speak to that would be really helpful. So,
and I like I like to give examples, like exact examples. So there was a time when there was a kid from North Hills named Eddie, white kid from North Hills named Eddie, and Ed would come into Pittsburgh and do business with me. But be clear, Ed was going to sell back in North Hills. There would be times that Ed would get caught with the exact same drug that I just gave him, in a sense, and Ed would always end up down on Beaver Avenue at recovery. I really considered Ed to be my friend. I didn't want him to be, charged as harsh as I was, but we would go over this pattern over and over and over again, that whatever Ed would get caught with, Ed would always end up down at Beaver Avenue, because he would just get the misdemeanor possession, simple possession misdemeanor. And I would always get, it went even to the point one time on East Ohio that when he got caught later and he got the misdemeanor and I got the intent to deliver, even though I didn't get caught with the drugs that Ed had at the time. So it was like we caught a guy coming from this way. We felt like you had to be the one that delivered this drug to him, and you get the felony. And to me, I've had these experiences with this criminal justice system where that racial disparity kicks in, and to me, it was just like a part of what happened. But on the other end, there's another part of the criminal justice system, and I'm gonna be really quick with this, that my grandmother was murdered in 69, and a white woman shot her, and that was because they felt like that she shouldn't live in the houses that she lived in down on Ridge Avenue on the north side. And the woman was found guilty of murder, and the judge gave her a suspended sentence, gave her 1 year probation. So on one end of the criminal justice system, I'm seeing me constantly be hit as harsh as I possibly can. 4 years for that first time offense, felony for things that they felt like a white guy could get simple possession, and then a white woman murdering my grandmother and found guilty, and they gave her a suspended sentence and 1 year probation. So it's like that. So to me, those are really harsh examples of how race plays a part in Allegheny County as it pertains to the criminal justice system.
Hi, thank you. Those are some really invaluable experiences, truly.
Race, I think, has a I know that the crimes are disproportionate. I say that they're disproportionate because we wouldn't have to create laws like Senate Bill 2 and the truth in sentencing laws from the Senate to say that if someone had powder cocaine, an ounce of powder cocaine and an ounce of crack cocaine, one's getting, the guy on Wall Street, the white guy on Wall Street that gets caught with an ounce of cocaine, he's going to get a slap on the wrist. The guy that gets caught with and the black guy that gets caught in the projects with an ounce of crack cocaine is going to get 20 years. Yeah, that in and of itself is designed. You could say, well, that's just how the legislation intended. Really? wow. So it's okay to treat people differently. And I thought we all had the right. I thought we all had inalienable rights drafted by the Bill of Rights, which gives the Constitution its power. All men are created equal. Rich or poor. You do the math on it. I see a lot more poor people in prison than I do wealthy.
John, it's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, I think, right, I think there's so much that you bring to the table that it's just really powerful. So next question, guys. What was your support system like? And what do you think you needed in your time in the criminal justice system when it comes to support?
So I felt like at the time when this was all happening with me, my support system was minimal, because at that point in my addiction, most people had kind of, walked away from me or had distanced themselves from me. I have, really close family and supportive family, which I feel lucky for. So, at the time I did have, some support, mainly from my mom. My dad was kind of at that point, he felt like he had to let me go and kind of detach himself. So, I did have that support, but, I feel like what I did need at the time was, and I always still say this now, is some sort of advocate within either the jail or the courthouse or something to come down and talk to me, because I didn't have the funds to hire a private attorney. So everything that I got was kind of just paperwork being sent to me and what other inmates were telling me, and, phone calls to my mom and she, had no idea. And so I didn't really have any education. There wasn't any internet access at the time. And I wasn't able, unless there was money on my books, to make calls, to many people. So the support, when I was actually incarcerated was minimal. And it would have been nice if there would have been some sort of advocate to come down, explain the charge, explain, the options that you could possibly have. I did have support from a therapist that had worked with me for years, trying to get me into rehab and trying to help me get clean. And she was able to, set up a place for me to go to rehab at, if they would have, released me on my own recognizance, ROR me without, a bond. And, the judge said no to that, even though I had a bed waiting for me for rehab. He would not release me. So that kind of felt like he wasn't supportive of, treatment.
Okay, my support system early on, I mean, you're talking in the 90s. I got one Christmas card. I didn't have a whole lot of money. My parents didn't have, my mom, I should say, didn't have a whole lot of money. She wasn't working. My stepdad, who was a retired homicide detective for Toledo Police, who I would say I could have utilized a long time ago. But the mentality thing was there. So I didn't want to talk to a cop because I was trained to not talk to cops. Not, that's what it is. You know what I mean? So my brother, he was in the military for he just retired. He did 28 years in the military. And my little brother, he's like me. We grew up with this mentality. So I got to toughen up. I got to bury how I'm feeling, the wrongs that I feel. Regardless if I was wrong or right, I have to burden that. I have to carry that. I have to bury it and act like nothing happened and move on. So support system in that sense, I don't think I actually even knew what a support system was.
So just to speak to something that Shannon said really quickly, like to me, that's important that off of what I said in the last segment is that the the initial indicator is becomes race, but then there's an indicator that kicks in on class. If Ed wasn't from North Hills and he was from Spring Garden, he may have been treated the same way I was treated. And we've seen that. So those initial race kicks in, but then also class kicks in, and Ed's, parents were well off in Penn Hills. I mean, I'm sorry, in North Hills, and they were doctors or whatnot. So that's that. I just wanted to kind of clarify that is that it initially becomes race, but then it breaks down to class, and then certain class, regardless of your race, you may end up being treated the same way that I was treated as well. And when it comes to support systems, similar to what Shannon spoke on is that some folks, kind of may distance themselves, right away. And then from that distancing that takes place, you might not even, I might have found myself not even, let's say, utilizing the support system that may have been in place because I felt like, they were all going to kind of react the same way that some of the folks kind of reacted. There's always those folks that'll never leave you and as far as your mom, but my father, he was one of the ones that, put a line in the sand and we, separated, was not going to be the support system that during the 3 years that I was incarcerated, we had no contact at all, not through letters, phone calls. So let me say the traditionals, let me say that the some of the folks that will always be there, regardless of, what decision you make, were there. And then some of the other folks, it may have been off of me not realizing they were there because, I didn't, you don't want to keep going into that rejection of engaging folks and folks kind of not getting back, feeling that same engagement. So you might kind of like just not realizing they're there, even though they may be there, and they tell you that they may have always been there. So I'm gonna say a little bit was my fault in a sense. I'm gonna own up to some of that, I guess.
Well, that's fair. So in that same kind of thing, how did cycling the system kind of impact your life, either now or after? And that can speak to the returning to use or from your substance use or just in cycling the system in general.
Oh, cycling in and out. Cycling in and out of the system. I think it's a funny thing. Like I remember my first prison number. To this day, I can't get it out of my head. 299324. And that number has affected me my entire life. Getting out, there was like no real assistance. I just got a bus pass, and if I didn't have a place to go, then I could go to a mission, a homeless shelter. And then, and the truth of the matter is when you go to a homeless shelter, you got to fight for a bed. You know what I mean? Like you got to be there or you're sleeping on the street, and luckily in my situation, my mom took me back. She didn't really want to, but she did, you know what I mean? And I was able to network, and friends of friends helped me and got me my first job. Now with that, I say that to say I wasn't getting paid what I should get paid. You get paid less when they know you can't go anywhere else, or you know what I mean? So your opportunities to earn a meaningful income is diminished greatly by having a felony. Like I said, I had PTSD. I would act out on that PTSD and that depression by substance abuse. I mean, I abused whatever substances I could get my hands on to mask the pain. And that pain was like twofold. It was an illusion of what I was taught to be in prison. This person I got to be a hardened criminal. I have to fight. I have to be tough. I can't show emotions. Otherwise, that's a signal of weakness. Even with the staff, if you went to the staff crying in prison, they'd be like, hey, you're soft. You're weak. You know what I mean? Get out of my face. And it's like, the mental health aspect, it's gotten better in prisons these days, but it could be a lot better, because I felt like I didn't get to a root cause, whether that be depression, undiagnosed. It was funny because I read something that said 98% of all Americans have some form of mental illness. So the world is jacked up. If that's true, if that's indeed true, it's sad that we haven't addressed that as a nation. Most powerful nation in the world.
I mean, it just hurt my, I think, like self-esteem big time, I would say. And it always felt like this thing that was like hanging over me, like having, something on your back, like just always, worried about it, anxiety about it. It felt like things were hopeless. I would never be able to turn this all around. I would never be able to put this behind me. Like it was always going to be lingering. Financially, I had a lot of fines and money that had to be paid back, but yet it was hard to find a job at the time, and then hard to find, a stable place to live at the time. Like there's a lot of things put on you, but if you don't pay the courts, like they'll incarcerate you again, or violate your probation and whatnot. So I mean, that and like stress, because like when I first got involved with the criminal justice system, I had already obtained a bachelor's degree. So at that point I was like, well, that was all for nothing, because now I have all these charges and I'm never going to be able to use that. And appealing that to the courts didn't really seem to matter a whole lot. Like it was kind of like more of like this mentality of like, you're in now, you're in forever. And it doesn't matter if you got that bachelor's before, because, the odds are that you're not going to turn this around anyways. And so like, it kind of just is, it just kind of impacts your life and kind of gives you like this sense of hopelessness a lot. And just there's something, hanging over your head all the time.
Like an X on your back the rest of your life.
It's like your debt is never paid. Like it's literally, it puts you to a point that, when I finished 3 years of probation in Allegheny County, I thought everything was good. I had a halfway decent job working downtown. I was a couple floors above the folks that I was in charge of the probation or parole, whatever. And out of nowhere, my credit score dropped by 50 points. And I was wondering what happened. This was like what's going on? Because I was working on my credit. And I checked, and it was like the fines and court costs got sent to collections, and they made no attempt to reach out to me to make a payment arrangement or anything. So that kind of blew my mind. And fortunately, I think God was at work, because it happened 2 weeks after I had purchased the house. If it would have happened a month or two before I purchased the house, my credit score would have dropped to the point I wouldn't have been able to buy the house, actually. And 20 years later, I get to the point that I went through the expungement process, and now I'm going through the pardon process. And now when I was incarcerated in Montgomery County, they said that I owe some fines and court costs for that. And actually, to go through the pardon process, you have to not owe any fines to the courts. And it's like, I'm trying to track them down. I'm trying to get the paperwork from them. Somewhere on their books, they said they wrote it off, as a write-off. It's like it becomes a maze of just a circus event. And I'm saying to myself, haven't I paid you enough? I gave you 3 years of my physical time in New Jersey. I gave you 3 years of this mental incarcerated on probation, right? And I haven't been arrested in 19 years. Like, when is enough gonna be enough? You know what I mean? And I'm not somebody that actually I didn't kill anybody. I'm not one of, how this horrible person or anything like that. I possessed some drugs. I sold some drugs. I own up, under the restorative justice thing, to where I have brought harm to my community, and I know that. And I've done everything over the past 19 years trying to repair that harm that I committed on my community. But when is enough that the system can actually say, okay, that 19 years later, this man isn't having a conversation with folks at the health department on whether or not we can hire you because you were arrested 19 years ago. To me, they never let you go. They never keep their hands out. They never take their hands out of your pocket. Like, so that's what it done to me. And it even kind of triggers me even speaking, but I love to talk about it, because if you don't talk about it, then they won't know what they're doing and what needs to be done to fix what they're doing.
Right. Absolutely. Hearing the anxiety in both of you, I mean, it's still with you, right?
Yes.
The debt is still not paid.
That is
even
still
now.
not paid.
I'm going to skip questions and jump ahead a little bit because I think it kind of touches on this. So, you guys, were there times in jails when interacting with the court system or traumatizing? And if so, again, what would you like people to experience today that you can kind of relate to in that regard?
Interacting with the court system in general, one big thing that stands out for me was my case was in Westmoreland County, and it happened in the town that I live in, and it's a small town, not super small, but like people know people, and the judge on the case knew my family. And when I walked in, from Westmoreland County for my first court appearance before him to set bail and whatnot, my public defender tried to, get like I said, an ROR, release on your own recognizance, or, a low bail. And he talked about, having a treatment bed available for me that day. And the direct quote from the judge was, "Oh, that's Lyons. No, get her out of here. She's going back to jail." So that was a big one for me. And then just like the mentality, some of the COs were nice, but a lot of them, the mentality is kind of like, you'll be back. And I remember when I was getting released, I was sitting there with all my stuff, like waiting for them to say I could go up. And the one CO was like, "You'll be back." Like, she looked me in the face and was just like, "You'll be back." And I remember thinking, like, it's just, I'm sure you do see people come, and like, I get it. There's a lot of burnout, and, you have to deal with a lot of stuff, but, why feel the need to say that to somebody who I had never met her prior to coming in to, and that was the first time that I had been in that jail. So I don't know. And it's just like very isolating. You're locked down a lot in that jail. And there is, minimal things that you can do for, treatment and whatnot, but it's definitely very isolating. And yeah, I don't know. I think that those two stick out the most for me.
Well, thank you for sharing those. I know it's kind of hard to share traumatizing experiences, so I appreciate that. Taili, same question. Again, if there were times in the court specific system that were traumatizing, again, and what would you like people not to have to experience today?
My release from prison in New Jersey was extremely traumatizing, because first of all, I had made plans on actually my home plans for Pittsburgh, like for me to come back to Pittsburgh on Jacksonia Street, which is now known as the Mexican War Streets. But I guess in the 90s, when I lived there and I made parole plans there, the state of New Jersey said that that community was not suitable for me to return to. So for folks that don't know, the Mexican War Street now, back then, it was, the crime rates were higher. This was before it was gentrification took place. So the state of New Jersey sent people to Pittsburgh on Jacksonia Street and said, "No, we're not allowing him to home plant to his house." I guess in my best interest, they denied me. So therefore, I had to do an extra year on administrative hold in the systems, right? But then when they released me, they took me to a homeless shelter, and I had to get in line at a homeless shelter for a bed each night. And they got to the point of realizing they needed the bed. So they actually put me out in Paterson, New Jersey at a homeless shelter and said, and the quote was, "You can't leave the state of New Jersey." So I didn't have money. I didn't have a stable place to stay. Um, and literally after a week of it, I just actually had someone send me money and I violated. So I violated within a week and was like, I can't line up each night at a homeless shelter, because the homeless shelter, what people don't understand, because I said, okay, I could do this. I could just hang around the building all day until I get a job. You have to actually be off of the properties at 6 a.m. And then you have to line up for a bed at 6 p.m. So literally I was let out on the streets of Patterson, New Jersey, just wandering the streets for hours. And it was so much stress. It was like, I always tell, there was a book I read when they mentioned when a group of slaves actually was read that they were free at the master's house. And they realized, okay, we're free, and the joy of being free. Because I always say, like, when I was released from jail, it had to be the closest thing to being birthed, being born. So on the plantation, folks, they're like, oh, we're free. But then they always talk about the conversation that happened back in the slave quarters where they were like, well, where are we going to go? Like, literally, this is his land. This is it. Where are we going to go? And a lot of them would find themselves back up there negotiating with the master on how can I stay on your properties at the end of the day. And they became, sharecroppers or whatnot. And I felt that because I was happy. I remember being on the train and like, okay, I'm happy. I'm free. And then as I stood in that line at the homeless shelter, I was like, this is crazy. And then when I found out the rules that I couldn't just hang around a homeless shelter all day, that I had to be off the properties in Patterson, New Jersey. And I would just walk around in Patterson, New Jersey for hours. And I was like, this ain't good. Like, this is terrible. And then I get to the point of making the decision. So are you going to violate your parole? And I said, okay, send me some money. I'm coming home and I'm going to violate. And literally I violated. And it was fortunate enough that they had kept me long enough that I actually had maxed out like 2 weeks later. So when I came back to report to my PO, he was like, hey, you're right. Your max date is next Wednesday. And he jokingly said, and don't leave the state until then. And I was like, and he knew after I was done with him, I was going right back home to Pittsburgh, because one thing he knew was I didn't give him an address because I didn't live anywhere. You know what I mean? So I said, yeah, I'm at the homeless shelter. He know I wasn't at the homeless shelter. He know I don't want anybody to go through the joy of being free, but then also being challenged with, are you going to commit a crime again? By violating at the end of the day, under the conditions that they released you to, but yet they said the conditions for you to go home were too bad on the north side of Pittsburgh, Jacksonian Street. So therefore, in my best interest, they're not going to release my home plans to Pittsburgh, where I was born and raised and lived at the time.
I know we're kind of approaching near the end of our session, but I do have one more question I wanted to get out there to you guys. And I think it's very important, and kind of we'll end with that if we have time. So can you guys tell me, did you use any harm reduction services at any point in time during your criminal justice experience, and were they helpful?
So for me, I did, it wasn't during my criminal justice system involvement, it was prior to that. And that was MAT maintenance, medicated assisted treatment, and it was methadone maintenance. I found out that I was pregnant when I was actually in inpatient rehab, and they then had to transfer me onto, at the time they were using methadone as the primary medication for that. So I did, take that as prescribed daily, wasn't using anything else. I had, a healthy delivery. My child didn't have to go through any sort of withdrawal. Luckily, she was monitored and didn't suffer from, many symptoms, and, it saved her life, I would say. And I was able to kind of start my recovery journey through that experience. But prior to that, most other things hadn't worked for me. I did try, Suboxone maintenance, which I wasn't able to be successful on. Just for me, I know it works well for so many people though. But, you know, I always say things like if, you know, clean needles were more so available and it wasn't such a hassle to obtain those, you know, I may not have contracted hepatitis C, which I have been cleared of since, but that was another stressor when I got clean of, you know, going through that treatment. And my, you know, somebody very close to me has been on, you know, MAT for a long time, and it has worked wonders for that person. And so I think that it definitely can be super beneficial. It just, at the time for me, you know, a lot of this harm reduction stuff wasn't available. It wasn't really talked about much, and MAT had kind of just started to gain some traction in the field. So, yeah, that's, you know, my experience mainly with that.
So I would say the program that Richard Garland had at the time was a form of harm reduction rather than criminalization, because there was a situation where, you know, one of the last cases that I had, um, one of the last cases that I had, somehow I had ended up getting, they had dropped the charges, but then they refiled the charges, and I had the original marijuana charges, and then they ended up giving me possession of heroin, even though at the original arrest I didn't have heroin. And from the time of my last arrest, I had committed to Richard Garland and the work of repairing the community with the harm that I had committed. And Richard ended up working with Sapala. And Sapala got to the point of saying, okay, rather than us, you know, really him having to go to court and prove that he wasn't possessed with these charges, we'll actually withdraw these charges. And if you're truly committed to this work with Richard, then I won't see you again, literally. And if you're not, if I see you again, I'll double down on the charges. So whatever we was going to charge you with, I'll give you twice the charges. And he was clear about that. He like literally said this, that, you know, and literally that was the last time I was arrested 19 years ago. So rather than actually charging me and having me fight that these drugs wasn't mine and that wasn't on the original arrest and all of that, I had been committed to the work in the community with Richard Garland and One Vision, One Life. I was an outreach worker, and you know, I was helping change my life and helping save lives of other folks within my community. I was doing that true work of repairing the harm that I committed to my community. And rather than Sapala and them taking me through the traditional process, because of the relationship he had with Richard Garland and the work that he was doing, he cut me a break, and that was the last time they seen me in the criminal justice system.
Wow. It shows with some compassion and giving someone a chance, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. They could have
No.
did that. They could have did that like when I first got arrested.
Same, John.
Well, I even aware of harm reduction. I don't want to say this to you. Like I had no idea of what recovery really was. Like we had 12-step meetings and stuff like that I participated in prison, later in prison. And that was only because it would look good for parole. It's certain things you have to do with your time. But I didn't really take them seriously. Like I didn't, the whole, admitting that I was powerless over something. So that was one strike on that checklist there of things not to do. As far as like services, the only thing I remember having in Toledo, Ohio was this place called Unison. And Unison would be like, it was a treatment facility, but they catered to more like the county jail. Like people, homeless guys would go to get arrested for a petty crime in the winter because they didn't want to sleep on the streets anymore. It's too cold. So they would commit a crime or something petty and, be intoxicated or drug paraphernalia, whatever. And they would all go there. That was my knowledge of how the treatment system worked. You know what I mean? So what I did was like me and my stinking thinking, I would say, okay, today I'm not going to smoke any weed. I'm going to drink. or as long as I drink and don't smoke crack, I'm okay. And or like I would do, it was just weird. I rationalized my usage of different substances, but trying to achieve the same goal, to mask, to bury these emotions in this process. Maybe, but that was my harm reduction.
No, I hear that. I think you guys really gave some really good examples of harm reduction too, and how it relates to your experiences. Before we go, is there anything that you think is really important that we didn't speak to that you would want people to know about the value of having a diversion program, or anything that we didn't talk about today that you think you'd like people to take away?
I mean, me personally, I feel just the value in giving people an opportunity, giving them a second chance. It really works, and there's real value to it, and really helping people that need help over punishing people. The system really isn't designed to punish people for real. Like, let me say this: it's not designed to rehabilitate people. It's more of so-called punishing people, but even more than that, it's really not punishing people. It's profiting off of people. Is what's really taking place. And so let's just get to the point. Even like, folk, one of my felony convictions is drug felony, and it was marijuana. And now, as I drive through the streets and see all these people lined up at these marijuana dispensers, I'm saying to myself, was I just a few years too early? But but now the system is profiting off of this harm that I was doing to the community with selling marijuana. And now you can go to every corner, and throughout Allegheny County and see lines of people buying marijuana. So let's really be in the business of helping people. And that's all I want to say.
I would just say that being involved in the criminal justice system, especially after getting into long-term recovery, has been one of the biggest stressors on me when it comes to, staying in long-term recovery. One of the things that I could have used as an excuse, several times, and had thought about using an excuse to relapse, basically, too much stress, too much money paid for them, too many barriers, too many things to comply with that, weren't necessarily fair, but I had to do because of this, lingering criminal background. So I just feel like it kind of gives people sometimes that are in recovery this reason, to not stay in recovery, or just it's too much. When you get into recovery, there's all these emotions and feelings and relationships and things you need to clean up. I had nothing when I got into recovery at all, and so having a criminal background is just an added thing onto that it's just super stressful. It makes you feel like there's really not, much you can do with your life, depending on what the charges are and how high up on, felony misdemeanor list they are. And so it's a huge stressor, and it's a huge barrier to overcome whenever people do get clean and into recovery. So I would just say that if there was more support in relation to this, or charges could be avoided, that would be, I think, really, helpful, especially with, recidivism and people financially.
Listen, I grew up in a pretty poor neighborhood. There weren't a lot of resources. The fun things I used to have was going to the Boys and Girls Club. And I say that because Boys and Girls Club was like a safe haven. I learned how to swim. I could do arts and crafts, do things like that. But the biggest thing was some of the counselors, stuff that some of the employees, they wanted to help. Like they knew if kids are struggling or whatever, at least you had somebody to talk to. But I was in a community where just not happening. Most of the people were just like me, in and out of prison, mad at the world. And then it's easy to find someone that says, hey, me too, that happened to me too. Man, that's messed up. That's real easy. It's real easy. but someone that says, no, you know what, your thinking was wrong on that, and here's why. So, instead of looking at it like this, why don't you try this? That, I think that, like Mr. Conte, challenged my intellect, and I think if I was stimulated early on like that, things probably would have been different. I wouldn't have acted the way I acted. And if I would have just got a chance instead of going right to jail, I think that would have been good too. Are we done? Was that the out?
That was my side. That was me. That was my connection. Sorry about that. No.
I just hope that, like, I just hope there's been a lot of talk about things changing, but I haven't seen in 20 years a lot of that changing. You know what I mean? It's just not.
This is the first step, right? This is why we're here. I can't put a dollar amount on what the value of what you guys brought to the table today. These are things that you can't come up with, and these are general experiences that I feel like are going to add so much value to what we're trying to do here with this program. I can't thank you guys enough, and I just want to say that thank you for the whole team. And if there's anything else that we can do, please let us know.
Thank you all for having me.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much.